Stay away from Jordan Peterson. His gospel is false. His gospel is dangerous. And pray that he can get over his own hurdles, which must be from, I'm going off of reading St. Augustine here, who was very much like Peterson, because he was in basically a Gnostic cult and was so smart that he could explain away all the Christian things and make them into whatever. And he said it was his pride that stopped him and his attachment to certain things of the flesh. Pray that that's not the case for Jordan Peterson. If it is the case for Jordan Peterson, pray that he gets over it and that he converts and saves his soul so that he can die in the church with his wife so they can spend eternity together. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the pseudo-Gnostic, very Teilhardian, and I'll explain what I mean by that, false gospel of Jordan Peterson. And before I do that, I want to say, first and foremost, please pray for Jordan Peterson. This is not something of, anathema and let him be accursed and, to heck with this guy. No, I believe that he should convert. And I've actually written about him in the past in a very positive way, praying that he would convert to the Catholic faith. I've done shows on it, years ago and things like that. I have found many of his things in the past on certain issues to be very helpful because he is very intelligent. But we are now he basically I knew of him before he was famous. He was sort of known I'm in Ontario, Canada, and he was kind of known in Canadian places and Canadian circles as being this, quirky, interesting professor. So you'd hear his lectures and things like that on public access television and so forth. And I remember hearing about him back in the day, and he was very fascinating on a lot of different things. He had a lot of interesting things to say about the Columbine shootings and stuff, and just sort of fascinating psychological stuff, psychobabble stuff that he's good at. Then he broke out in 2016, and I remember it was his first major viral video, and I know exactly when it happened because I was in the hospital with my wife who had just given birth to our second of 6 children. She had a C-section, so we were in there for like 3 days, and she was asleep, baby was asleep. I was just bored and sitting in the hospital room or whatever on the couch, and I opened up my phone to check on Jordan Peterson because he was someone I had been fascinated with, and I saw that he'd put this crazy video out, which was the sort of first viral thing where he was calling out his university and this and that and the other thing, and that sparked the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. That was in 2016. So it's been 8 years of this Jordan Peterson rise, and he's had this meteoric rise. He had a major fall because of an addiction to benzos, basically, and then he's come back in full force with Daily Wire and so forth. And I'm very happy he's healthy, and again, he said very many good things. He was very good in many ways. He has been criticizing the government of Canada, which has been good, and he's contributed to the conversation. I'm just trying to say all the nice things that I can say right now about the goodness of what he's done. I mean, the interviews that he did with Rex Murphy, who was an amazing Canadian author and journalist who recently passed away, may God rest his soul. Those are some of the most edifying as a Canadian interviews that I've ever listened to in my life. So I'm very grateful for some of the stuff he's done. Nonetheless, Jordan Peterson's presentation of Christianity is extremely heretical, and it is very dangerous when you break it down. I'm going to show you a quick clip here, and I'm going to show a small portion of his conversation with the famous atheist Richard Dawkins and this other fella. Cosmic Skeptic is his YouTube channel. I think it's called Alex Connor or O'Connor or something like that. I don't know. I just know him from thumbnails, seeing the name Cosmic Skeptic on YouTube, but I recognize the face. Never watched his program. But I wanted to show you a quick clip here to demonstrate what I'm saying. I'm just going to pull it up on my Twitter.
I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will
I'll just pause here very quickly. These men are materialists, and they're being honest materialists, and they're basically saying, hold on, Mr. Peterson. Do you believe in the virgin birth? Have you actually answered that question? And listen to his answer.
Understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know how to that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well,
Okay, it's really hard for me to listen to Richard Dawkins talk because it drives me nuts. But anyway, it's more of the same, going on and on about, that's very great, Mr. Peterson. I get it. Christianity is meaningful. It's a really great fairy tale that helps people be good. But is it true? Jordan Peterson has answered this question in many ways in the past, in ways that seem satisfying to many Christians, but it actually makes the problem worse. I remember in one case, a clip from him on Joe Rogan's show, and he was talking about the truth of the Bible, and he basically went, it's truer than true. And it was like, ooh, very deep and very fascinating, blah, 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 blah. Okay, anyway, here's the problem. What Jordan Peterson is presenting is a heretical, Gnostic, very Teilhardian understanding of Christianity. And I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, he's not assenting to the actual historical facts, and those are matters of the faith. It is not permissible for Christians to believe in a metaphorical resurrection or a metaphorical virgin birth. Yes, there are certain aspects of these historical events that do have symbolic meaning. For example, we believe that Christ was truly crucified with nails and with wood and so forth. It's a physical event that took place. We can also say that there is this symbolic meaning to it, which is X, Y, and Z. It's kind of like an allegory in the sense that, you nail the truth to the cross, but then it rises again. You try to suppress the truth and it comes back. Yeah, those are secondary meanings, but primarily it's an event that took place for a particular reason, the forgiveness of sins and so on and so forth. Stamped it, locked it, can't erase it. The virgin birth is a historical fact. Stamped it, locked it, can't erase it. Resurrection, many other things, walking on water, whatever. Jordan Peterson will not assent to any of these things. And what he does is he offers an explanation that goes beyond I can't say, which fair enough, it's an answer, to, well, I can't say, but here is why there's a deeper meaning. And that's not acceptable. So there was this heretic, his name was Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit. The Jesuits used to be really good, and there are still some good Jesuits alive. Shout out to Father McTagg, for example, who's a good Jesuit. They're very few, sadly. One of my favorite saints in history is St. Edmund Campion. I ask for his intercession literally every day of my life. He is just an extraordinary saint, and thinking of his story gives me chills. Many great Jesuits. Nonetheless, Father Teilhard de Chardin was an arch heretic, and he espoused a heresy that the most succinct way we can say it was a heresy was that it was basically an evolutionist heresy. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So leaving aside debates about the strict historicity of every possible claim that's made in Genesis, and I do believe Genesis is historical. I'm just saying I don't want to make that the sidetrack thing for the sake of this conversation. Leaving aside certain unknown parts, it is a matter of the Catholic faith. You can look this up in Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma by Ludwig Ott and various other sources. I mean, there's lots of different places. Adam was specially created by God in a special way, not, born from a monkey or an ape or whatever. Eve was made from his side. I mean, Pope Leo XIII talks about this in the encyclical Arcanum, and he calls it something that no one can deny. And if you watch my podcast I did a couple days ago, 3 or 4 days ago on, I can't remember what it was, but we went through how we knew if something was infallible or not. And it's very clear that Pope Leo XIII was speaking in this encyclical to the Universal Church about how it's just an indisputable fact that Eve was taken from Adam's side. Various things are infallible from it. Nonetheless, Teilhard de Chardin basically denied all this. And he had this sort of pantheistic, very Eastern belief that there was this sort of primordial energy source. And then from there, everything sort of emanates from that and then basically goes towards what he called the point omega, or the omega point. And what was this? Well, Teilhard de Chardin, he uttered the blasphemy that Christ himself was saved by evolution. And if you look into what Teilhard de Chardin said about this sort of thing, he basically said that Christ was the most perfect manifestation of a man at the height of all the possible human capabilities and faculties and potentialities and so forth. And because he was so in touch with the primordial essence of whatever about how the highest reality of nature could be, and he had no impediment because of his perfections. Therefore, he himself was sort of made divine, and in this sense, we call him the Son of God. That's pretty heretical. I mean, that's just obvious heresy. Jordan Peterson has said the exact same thing on more than one occasion. I remember specifically someone asking about one of these similar questions about the resurrection and whatever. And he basically said, well, I don't know how to answer that.
Someone once asked you whether you thought Jesus was literally resurrected, and you said, it would take me 40 hours to answer that question. Okay, that's the kind of thing I'm responding to here. You don't need to do that if you have a clear-cut answer to that question.
I don't have a clear-cut answer to that question.
And if you don't, that connects with many other things that we still have to talk about.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
because that...
It isn't obvious in the biblical account that Christ was literally resurrected.
Because I don't know what it would be like to be around someone who sort of was fully in tune with the whatever dominance hierarchy, the things he likes to say, and basically went on to say all these sorts of things, that Christ was sort of perfect because he was sort of divine in the sense that perfect things are divine, not assenting to the divinity of Christ.
There's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now, you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense because it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that. That's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. We have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ.
I remember one time listening to Jordan Peterson, someone asked him a question, or he was doing some lecture about what it meant in the scriptures when it says that in sorrow you shall bring forth a son, or bring forth your children, when you read Genesis and it's the punishment that Eve receives. And his answer was, I kid you not, his answer was, well, this is just because human beings have such a large cranial capacity because of the evolution of our intelligence or of our brains, and therefore the birth canal isn't wide enough for the cranium, which causes much more harm to the woman and sorrow than it would if she was an animal. That was literally his answer. And I remember just sort of laughing to myself going, did this guy actually just say that?
God tells that Eve, well, you've really, screwed things up too. You're going to have these big brain babies, and that's a big problem. You're going to suffer in childbirth, and then they're going to be dependent on you forever. And because of that, you're going to be dependent on this man that you just woke up, and that's not going to be very pleasant for either of you. But
he views the scriptures through evolution. He views everything as this march towards this sort of omega point. So when you see him talking about, there's something to this story, that it was able to bring the pagan world to its knees, blah, 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 blah. There's a meaning there and a power there that goes beyond all other stories. He's really basically saying that Christianity is sort of like this synthesis of all possible musings about all possible unknown questions, synthesized into a pseudo-historical narrative that brings us to the point of this sort of search for spiritual perfection that if we follow it, we can perhaps find what it means to be divine. That's what Jordan Peterson's gospel is. That's what it is. He's just very, very intelligent, and he says things in ways that sound really smart, so they seem smarter than they are. But what he's uttering is essentially the exact same heresy as Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin had this notion that there was this thing called a new sphere. Basically, everything would evolve to this point where being above this plane of existence that we understand it now, to this sort of synthesis with the divinity that is the source of all things, which is this evolutionary thing, that it would just continue until the point where everything would be evolved beyond the material realm into this place of perfect harmony with the creative force that sustains all things. This is just basically pantheistic Hinduism. This is at the root, when you really follow Jordan Peterson's gospel, his false gospel, it brings you to this point of this essential Gnosticism that is very confusing to people. There is real danger in looking at the scriptures through the lens of evolution. And Jordan Peterson is a committed evolutionist. He's committed like to the nth degree. For example, there's that memes that go around where he talks about lobsters, and he says, well, there's this something in the human person that it's so deep within us that we even find this in the brain stems of lobsters, and they're 150 million years old or something like that. But even that notion, this evolutionary notion that there's this ancestral memory with allegedly 150 million year old crustaceans from the water that come from this primordial source. Even this is very Gnostic. I mean, it's very pantheistic as well. I mean, think about it for a second. This is what's so frustrating about the Jordan, about this evolutionary gospel that men like him pronounce. Basically, what they're saying is that there is this continual memory that stems from the time when we were in some sort of ooze or pond, whatever. And the atheists are going to laugh at me because we don't actually believe it was a pond. We don't actually believe it was ooze. Okay, just get a grip. When you talk about things like the Big Bang, they'll say, we don't actually believe it's an explosion. No, you say it was a rapid expansion of energy that basically combusted out of a singularity point and then expanded, faster than the speed of light. Okay, well, that's called an explosion, by the way, but you can pretend it's not. I'm not saying it had to be destructive. I'm just saying that's what an explosion is. When you compress things into a certain size and there's sort of some an activation of the energy that makes it so that it can no longer maintain itself within that and it expands beyond its borders. That's literally what an explosion is. Okay, so it's an explosion. It's a bang. That's why they've called it the Big Bang. They've tried to backtrack on that, but that's what a bang is. Call it, faster than the speed of light emanation. You're talking about an explosion. But anyway, whether it's an ooze or a bog or a swamp or a whatever, the primordial thing where, we were told growing up that, perhaps lightning hit a thing and then it sparked, whatever it is. The point is that these evolutionists really spiritualize material. They really spiritualize material because they associate metaphysical things, thoughts and ideas, with physical evolution. Jordan Peterson, he's also explained, for example, that in Genesis, where it talks about the serpent, he has said this is an ancestral memory of ancient hominids in this, in the savannah or whatever. And it's a projection of their fear of predatory snakes.
Evil gets associated with Satan, and Satan gets associated with the snake. It's mind-boggling. I mean, these are how we were chimps. It took us a long time to develop up, say, an ideal. Just to say the word an ideal implies a counter-ideal. Say, well, those things were embodied way before they were ideas. And after they were embodied first, not as bad, but as a bad thing or a bad person. Bad had to be extracted out of that. And even that was extracted as a drama first.
So, move over, church fathers. Jordan Peterson is here to tell us that the pain in childbirth is because of the evolutionary size of heads. Okay. And that the divinity of Christ is because of his perfect cohesion with the potentiality of the dominance hierarchy, whatever that means. Okay. And that the serpent, the devil being portrayed as a serpent is because of our ancient memories in our subconscious from 100 million years ago or whenever it was, because you can make up the numbers and say whatever they are. You can just literally make it up as you go along because that's what they do. And that is an example of our fear of snakes. This isn't Christianity. This is a Gnostic pantheistic pseudo-gospel. This is Teilhard de Chardin. Go look at the works of Teilhard de Chardin. Jordan Peterson is saying the same syncretistic, pantheistic, Gnostic, evolutionist, false gospel that has been condemned by church fathers and councils and popes and recent times and so forth and various different iterations throughout human history because it's just simply false. The reality is that the scriptures are true. The reality is that, yes, there are certain books where there are obviously visions versus historical events, but where there are historical, they're historical. The reality is that the New Testament surely is there is no room for doubting the truth of the New Testament as a Christian. There are certain permissions given in the most authoritative statements that we have in recent memory about, for example, the age of creation. You can have debates about the length of the day mentioned in Genesis and things like that. If you're following it to the letter of what's been stated and under certain popes in the last century or two, fine. But with the New Testament, no such permissions were given. Jordan Peterson is really, with his presentations, he is basically just a modernist. And we are so far gone. We are so far gone in our church today with such terrible theological training that when we hear someone who is socially conservative expressing religion like a Chardinian, Teilhardian modernist, we look at it as if it's revelatory and has something to say. It's just a disaster. Stay away from Jordan Peterson. His gospel is false. His gospel is dangerous. And pray that he can get over his own hurdles, which must be from, I'm going off of reading St. Augustine here, who was very much like Peterson, because he was in basically a Gnostic cult and was so smart that he could explain away all the Christian things and make them into whatever. And he said it was his pride that stopped him and his attachment to certain things of the flesh. Pray that that's not the case for Jordan Peterson. If it is the case for Jordan Peterson, pray that he gets over it and that he converts and saves his soul so that he can die in the church with his wife so they can spend eternity together. That's all. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Mere Tradition. Until next time, God bless you all.